the nihilist is saying nothing matters, well, if nothing matters, then you can do whatever you want.
Then what's the right way to live life? If you like killing people, let's go and kill people. So I'm here with John Marmysz. Is that right?
Marmysz. Mm-hmm.
Marmysz. So who are you, John?
Who am I? Gosh, that's a big philosophical question. I'm a philosophy instructor at the College of Marin. I've been teaching there for 18 years. I've been interested in philosophy since I was a teenager, and my specialty is in nihilism and humor.
Nihilism and humor. Both of them is something that I'm deeply interested about. But nihilism, I think, is a bit complex word. As I understand, nihilism is about nothingness in the world. So yeah, can you explain me what nihilism is?
Sure. Another complicated, very, very complicated topic. The word itself comes from a Latin word, nihil, nothing, ism, the study of or the science of. So nihilism, as you quite rightly stated, is a philosophy of nothingness. The term is more than descriptive, though. It has this whole history behind it, which not only describes a state of affairs, but it seems also to be an evaluation. So typically when people are using the term nihilism, they're using it as a criticism, in a negative way, you might say. So they're criticizing the thing that they're talking about. So in philosophy, to call someone a nihilist has traditionally been an insult. To claim that someone's philosophy is nihilistic is to say that it has nothing positive about it, that it's destructive, that it advocates, the tearing down of anything that's positive, and that it doesn't advocate any sort of, positive alternatives. And that to me is something that needed to be challenged. So I guess you could say that my entire sort of career in philosophy has been focused on challenging that very, very notion about nihilism. Ever since I was a teenager, the things that I was interested in were criticized as being nihilistic. And I think that that's the very thing that got me interested in the whole topic. So things like horror movies, existential literature, like the works of Camus or Sartre, punk rock music, one of my my favorite form of music. All of that has been criticized as nihilistic.
So you mean that horror movies and all this stuff that you are describing now, the people, the society, they didn't find the value inside it, and you found value inside those things?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, perfect way of putting it. Growing up, my superiors and authority figures thought that those things had no value, that I should be interested in other sorts of things. And, for me, I found a great amount of joy in watching things like horror movies or listening to punk rock music. And so I think that's what led me to wonder, so, am I a nihilist? And, I've come to the conclusion that I am, and that's not a bad thing, that there is value in nihilism.
So
what is nihilism?
What is nihilism? What is this nothingness that we are talking about? What is this theory?
Right. Well, that's one of the weird things about, coming to terms with who you are is you are who you are, but you don't know who you are until you reflect back upon who you are and the things that you like. And so that's been the sort of journey that I've been through.
That's interesting. You are who you are, but you don't understand who you are until you reflect back on yourself.
Yeah, I think it's very true. I mean, That's, most of us kind of drift through life not reflecting on who we are. And so even though we are who we are, we don't really know ourselves. And my reflections on nihilism, led me to try to understand what it is in me that was nihilistic. And so, as I became more systematic in my approach to it, I came to a kind of definition of what nihilism is. And for me, nihilism has to do with the situation. It's a way of thinking. Okay? It's a philosophy, and that philosophy has certain premises that it works from. The first of the premises is that our highest aspirations and goals are out of reach. So things like absolute perfection or beauty, truth, those sorts of things are their projections, these superlative goals that we can never attain. We can never attain absolute truth. I think you said that in one of your podcasts.
You use too many complicated words. You need to to make it more simple for me to understand.
Well, this is something that you mentioned in one of your podcasts. No one knows the truth. I recall you saying that, and that's the basic idea here. Is that what is truth? It's something that you're searching for and you're trying to get at, but you can never grab onto it. You can't get your teeth into it. It's not something tangible, okay. Right? What is something?
So this is the fundamental thing about nihilism. This is the belief that
that's the first premise,
that we cannot find any true thing in this world. What is what does true means?
Well, and that's part of the dilemma here, is that there's something about humans that we want truth, right? I mean, the whole history of philosophy is the search for truth, for real truth, not fake truth. Okay, we want to know what's really real, not just what people say is real, not what just feels good, not what just makes us money. Philosophers, the very meaning of the term philosophy is a love of wisdom. Okay? We aspire and we love the truth. Okay? But in order to love and move towards something, it has to be out of your grasp. I mean, if you had it, you wouldn't be moving towards it, right? And so the first premise of nihilism, as I see it, is that truth and other sorts of goals like goodness, beauty, okay, these fundamental things that we value, that they're out of our grasp. We don't have them. Okay? And that's the very thing that many people criticize about nihilism and think is negative about it, because it's fundamentally saying that we don't have what it is that we want. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. Let me rephrase to see if I understand. So you're basically saying that nihilism is basically seeing reality as it is, that we don't have what we want or need, but we're going towards it in a way.
Very good.
You just accept this, that we are not perfect, we are not fully happy, we are not we don't know the truth, but we are in a direction of going there.
Good. Yeah, excellent. The one thing that I would add to that, though, and this is the second part of how I think of nihilism, is that this separation from what we truly want that we don't have is bad. It's other than it ought to be. So
wait, what do you mean is bad? You said
the
right. Separation. What? I didn't understand what you
mean. It's not the way we wish things would be.
Oh, so we imagine that it will be this amazing thing, and it's not going to be what we expect it to be.
Right. So
the truth.
Right. I desire truth. I realize it's out of my grasp. Now, there are some folks who might say, well, that's just the way it is. Who cares? But the nihilist does care. The nihilist says that's not the way the world should be. In other words, there's a fundamental flaw in the world. The world is not the way it should be. I am separated from what I most desire: truth, beauty, justice, goodness. So the world is flawed, according to the nihilist.
The world is flawed, and it will never get better.
That's the third point, is there's nothing you can do about it. We live in a flawed world in which we're separated from the things that we desire the most.
So if there is nothing to do about it, and we're living in a flawed world, so the only thing is to do is to accept it.
That's the response that traditionally has been leveled with nihilism. When philosophers discover something nihilistic, so you find this in the world's religions, say like in Taoism or in Buddhism. Buddhism is a perfect example of this. There's 4 noble truths in Buddhism. Life is suffering. Suffering is caused by desire. In order to get rid of suffering, get rid of desire, follow the Eightfold Path in order to get rid of desire. So in Buddhism, you have a perfect example of a philosophy which says, yeah, the world is messed up, and it's because we desire the world to be a different way than it is. So let's stop. Let's just accept the world the way it is. But the nihilist can't do that. So the nihilist is someone who's in a position in which they can't accept the world the way it is, but yet there's nothing you can do to change the world. There's a fundamental tragedy at the heart of nihilism.
So what nihilists do? They don't accept the world like it is. They don't like it, but still that's the way it is, and they cannot change anything.
So they struggle and they suffer. That's one of the aspects of nihilism, is the view that life is consumed with struggling and suffering. Now,
it's very interesting. It's like this is grabs to expand a lot of stuff that I want to paint the picture correctly in my brain, and it needs a lot more than what we just discussed to paint the picture on my brain on what is this belief exactly. So let's take a step back. So we're watching from above. I'm a human. I'm a nihilist, let's say, and I believe that there is this world that we're living there is no meaning, there is no reason to be here, and we will never find the reason, the meaning. I am a bit upset about that, but I cannot do anything. But I'm trying to do stuff, to learn and to do, like, this is what the nihilistic view is.
Good. Yeah. Now, part of what you've injected there, though, is a sort of response to nihilism. So the basic situation of nihilism is that state of being in which the world, like you said, seems to lack meaning because I can't grasp onto what my highest values are, and I feel that there's nothing I can do about it. Now, the traditional solution that's been offered to nihilism by philosophers is that we should do something about, we should change something about those premises. So like in Buddhism, as I said, the suggestion to avoid nihilism is to change the nature of your thinking. So think about the world differently, and then you can avoid, that tragedy of nihilism. Another solution is to reject the view that things like truth and justice and beauty, you can reject the view that those are unattainable. And so you have utopian philosophies like Marxism, Platonism, Christianity, various religions, which claim that, no, you can have the ultimate truth. So that's a way out of nihilism. If you accept all of the premises of nihilism, there are still a variety of ways that you can deal with it. So one of those ways, as many critics of nihilism point out, one of those ways is kill yourself. Suicide is a solution to nihilism. I think it's a mistake to say that that's the only solution. Okay? Another solution is to, as you said, continue grinding away in life, continue to suffer, continue to do things. Why? Well, not because they mean anything in the ultimate, course of reality, but to do it because, I don't know, it's interesting. Perhaps you can make interesting podcasts. You can write interesting books. You can make interesting art. So a nihilist, doesn't have to descend into suicide or passivity simply because, they don't have perfection in life. They can, do interesting things. So that's another solution to the nihilistic problem.
So you are defining this as a problem, nihilistic problem.
That's a good point. Traditionally, that's the way that philosophers talk about nihilism. It's a problem. And Christianity, Buddhism, Marxism, various political philosophies have been formulated as ways to get us past nihilism. I don't think of it as a problem so much as a state of affairs. It's the way the world is. It's a philosophy of the world. So you're right. Most people think of it as a problem to be overcome. I don't think of it as a problem to be overcome. I think of it as a situation to be dealt with.
Okay, so let's go on a day to day. I saw you like music. So rock music, I'm a punk rock or something like that.
Punk
music. So when you listen to the music, you feel something, right? You is that art feeling or this? What nihilist how to say about this experience thing? That is it like they say that is just meaningless, is artificial, this because you feel good when you listen to music, like this good feeling good. Not always, maybe you feel sad, or but this feeling, what nihilist has to say about it?
No, that's an excellent, it's an excellent example to examine. I mean, what is the purpose of listening to, say, punk rock music? And I'll speak for my own experience of it, is that it conjures emotions in me. It makes me feel a certain way, right? Angry, outraged, powerful. Right? Now, does it do it perfectly? No, there's no one punk song that gives me the perfect feeling of anger or outrage or power. Okay? There's not one song that does it perfectly. Does that mean that because no song perfectly expresses my feeling that I'm not going to listen to it, that I find it worthless and not worth listening to? No, it doesn't. Just because something doesn't perfectly make me feel a certain way doesn't mean that the feeling I have is insignificant. It's still a significant and what do I want to say?
Do we ever feel that perfect feeling in anything, or never? That perfect feeling suitable for us is unattainable.
I think, I think, as from the nihilistic perspective, that no, there is no perfect feeling. There is no perfect song. There is no perfect expression. In art, that's what I think nihilistic art, the nihilistic component of art is. Art is aspiring to express something, but there's no piece of art that perfectly expresses beauty or that perfectly expresses the sublime. Okay, they lead us in that direction. And so everything, music, art, okay, everything in life is a relative failure when judged from the perspective of perfection.
Do you think perfection is unattainable, period? Because maybe, let's say, when you give all your data piece of points to artificial intelligence in the future, and you say, this is this human, this is this biochemistry, this is his neuron, this is everything you need to know about this human, create the perfect song.
Right. I suppose that would be based on faith that artificial intelligence is going to produce perfection, which is very much like what religions sell us. Religions tell us, oh, there's no perfection in your life now, but if you just believe us, if you just trust us and follow, our pathway, then we'll lead you to perfection. And so, that requires faith. It's not the type of faith that nihilists have.
So perfection is unattainable according to nihilism.
That's one of the sort of basic assumptions. Okay. Of course, it's an assumption. As with any philosophy, it's falsifiable. Show me perfection, and I suppose then nihilism would crumble.
So it's a philosophy. You said it's a way of living. Like, what does that mean? Like, is something to live by? Is something to have like a religion? Is something to have this in your life?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. I've had students who tell me that philosophy sounds like a religion to me. Lacking religion, what do I have to make sense of the world? I have philosophy. Without philosophy, I can honestly say that I wouldn't have a life. Without philosophy has been what's offered me some sort of way of orienting myself towards the world ever since I was a teenager. It's why I've devoted my entire life to studying and teaching and writing about philosophy. So, what is it? It's a framework. It's a way of thought. And Spengler says that philosophy is a way for us to make sense of the incomprehensible. Okay? It's a way for us to face a world that doesn't make any sense and try to make sense out of it. The way that I think about philosophy, I use the phrase wondrous distress. I think philosophy is a form of thinking which human beings can utilize in order to encounter a world that ultimately doesn't make sense, and we can try to work towards making sense out of it. It's a never-ending sort of process. So with philosophy, I see it as it's this form of thought in which we're trying to engage with a world that is beyond comprehension ultimately. And so we're constantly asking questions about the world, trying to offer speculations about the world, but always recognizing that those questions lead to more questions, and those speculations are always open to questioning themselves. So philosophy is very, very friendly to ongoing questioning, to deferring final answers to reality, but it gives us a sort of a path, a path to tread.
Okay, to rephrase what you said to see if I understand. So you said that this philosophy is not a religion, but it's a way to help us, not generally philosophies and stuff. It's a way to help us reason and like have some basic assumptions to our thinking, so we can think and put. So for example, if you are thinking about the word, okay, let's go, okay, we're thinking there is no meaning to it, so this is an assumption that we put base and we build upon. So this is what you, so it's not is but the differentiation with religion is that is just helping you think, but the religion wants you to feel stuff, wants you to do stuff, wants you to do more stuff.
Yeah, I think the way that I distinguish between philosophy and religion, religion does have a basis in philosophy, but religion tends to offer final answers to questions. So, the world's religions tend to give followers some sort of final answer about the truth. They tell them, their followers, this is what the truth ultimately is. And that truth is something that goes beyond logic and reason. It's rooted in faith. So like earlier, you were talking about the possibility that AI will solve, all of our riddles in the future. You can't prove that through reason right now. You have to have faith that AI is going to do that in the future. And so I think that's a characteristic of religious thought, is faith that the system or the philosophy will lead to some ultimate truth. Philosophy as philosophy, I think, is open. It attempts to be presuppositionalist. It attempts to be open to more and more questions rather than offering final answers.
Do you think being a nihilist makes people happier?
Makes me happy. I think some people, no. Some people find nihilism the most depressing thing, in the world. The idea that you can never have your highest hopes realized, that everything in the world is substandard. But for me, and for actually an increasing number of philosophers, there's been sort of a recent turn, seeing nihilism as something that can make you very, very happy. I think I wrote a book about how humor and nihilism go together. And if you think of the world as a big joke, as absurd, now things that are jokes and that are absurd, they can be funny. And so life could be seen as one big, absurd, funny joke rather than as some depressing, failure.
Okay, so I want to admit something to you. So I probably one of the happiest people you ever met. And I don't think when I think about why I'm happy and trying to explain and like maybe give advice to other people, I try to not give advice, but let's say when I try to give advice to other people how to be happy, I'm say, okay, there is have no expectation, nothing is important, you are going to die, is like everything sucks, but I've in all this, when you put zero expectation, there is no meaning to anything. Everything is upside after. It's like it frees you from expectations from anything. So when you think that everything sucks, like people are selfish or all these things, and it's like, and then you just but still I can go and have sex with people, and I can go and do this, I can have friends, I can make videos, I can play games and all this stuff and have these emotions, eat ice cream and then feel bad about it, and so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this.
I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. I mean, there's something, it's a sense of liberation that potentially can come from feeling as though nothing is perfect in the world, that nothing is as it should be. If the nihilist is saying nothing matters, in a sense, well, if nothing matters, then you can do whatever you want. And so you can be liberated to do all of the things that give you joy, like you were talking about. I find that one of the implications of, a nihilistic philosophy. Again, not everyone does. Fyodor Dostoevsky has a character in, what is it? I think the Brothers Karamazov, who claims that if anything is permitted, this is a terrible sort of, situation. If anyone can do anything and there's no moral punishment, if there's no, moral rule against it, then the world would descend into immoral chaos, right? That's kind of a dim view of human beings. I mean, there's a lot of great things that human beings do, as well, out of the sheer joy of, of wanting to do something in the world. Like you're saying, you can make videos, you can make music, you can write books, you can love people. I mean, all of those are terrific things. There's nothing wrong with those things. And so choosing that, if nothing matters, why not choose those things? If those things make you happy. So I agree with you that I think that, that nihilism has a liberating aspect to it. I think the reason why a lot of people condemn it and are afraid of it is, honestly, a lot of people, they're afraid of their own freedom. They're afraid to be let loose in the world. They want guides. They want authority figures. They want people to tell them what to do. I mean, just look at, the various, political figures that we have in the world. People worship them like they're some sort of, religious god, because they want someone to tell them what's right. They want someone to tell them what to do. They want a pat on the back from a daddy figure. I'm being, sort of sarcastic there, but I think that's what scares a lot of people. Whereas for others like yourself, there's something liberating about taking authority, taking, absolute values out of the picture.
So we're touching into some interesting territories now. So if nothing matters, now I understood what you are saying, that it's liberating. And after these people get this feeling, if nothing matters, then what's the right way to live life? If you like killing people, let's go and kill people. I'm not saying it's not the right way to live, but it's like how we should live life. If we're both agree, let's say, that nothing matters and nothing will get better, but let's have fun with what we have, let's say.
Right. Yeah. For me, my answer to this is, the best way to live life is to recognize your goals and your aspirations, the things that you want to do, as yours. That they aren't. I want to study philosophy. Okay? That's my goal. It's not a goal that I think is objectively out there in the world. It's not something that exists independent of my thinking about it. And so I can't expect other people to want to do the same things as me. And so for me, one of the implications of nihilism for how you should live is to recognize that different goals are abstractions. They're fantasies of the individual, right? I have mine, you have yours. And so I see nihilism as leading to a non-oppressive way of living life. Okay? I can't enforce my goals upon yours because your goals are just as good as my goals. Now, of course, you raise that issue. Doesn't that liberate people to go do awful things like, killing people and such? Yeah, I don't think there's anything in nihilism that prohibits atrocity, okay, or cruelty. There's nothing prohibiting it. I mean, all I can say is that I don't want to be cruel, and I don't want to see, people harmed or hurt. And this is, there's a fundamental problem with nihilism. Over the course of, Western history, nihilism has been invoked for awful things. Okay? But it can also be invoked for positive things. In Russia, the Russian nihilists were terrorists. They thought that nihilism justified the destruction of the current political systems in order to try to clear the ground for something new. So nihilism, it can be destructive and it can be cruel, but it doesn't have to be. That's my point about it. And so, there's no necessity for the nihilist to be a violent, awful person, although there may be violent, awful nihilists. From my perspective, one of the things that nihilism teaches me is not to impose my values upon other people. So that's one of the ways that I see as important for living as a nihilist.
Well, I'm not saying that it maybe putting people in prison and doing. Or I'm not saying that nihilist doesn't want people to be in prison, but maybe having all these laws and all these so many oppressing things about the people, that what makes them want to go and kill more than they would do if they were let free to do.
It could be. It could be. I know that for some of us, when we're faced with unreasonable oppressive authority, the first reaction is to rebel. I've done that, since I was a teenager. I push back. And so you may be absolutely right. I guess that would be a scientific sort of sociological question. You could do studies in order to see if that was correct or not.
How does a nihilistic society looks like, full of people?
This is something that I've been sort of struggling with because a lot of people that criticize me right on that point. How would the world look if everyone followed this? My tendency is towards individualistic anarchism as a political philosophy. The philosophy of someone like Stirner, wherein you may have a nihilistic sort of society insofar as you've got individuals who have all sorts of differing goals that perhaps come together when they agree that they have common goals. So you may have, a whole set of goals. I may have a whole set of goals, and maybe there's some of our goals that overlap. Perhaps that's when society occurs, is when you and I come together and we say, okay, we've got a joint project that we want to work on, like doing a podcast. Okay. This is how society emerges, is by individuals agreeing that, this is something that I want to do. Okay. And we're not going to do it perfectly. It's not going to be, the perfect thing, but we're going to sit together here and we're going to do this thing. And that's how, a society emerges. I would say, from an anarchistic perspective, that when those joint goals start to dissolve, when people don't share goals anymore, then that's when, the union of those two people dissolves as well. That's when we no longer agree to exist in the same society. So my thought on that is how nihilism kind of articulates with politics. I guess it leads to a kind of individualistic anarchism for me.
What does individual anarchist mean? Really?
So an anarchist would be someone who does not want authority dictating to us what we should be doing. The individualistic anarchist, would be the one who says that each individual is their own authority, so they don't have any higher authority above them. There are socialist.
What is the difference between anarchy society and individual anarchy society?
Well, some anarchists are communal and socialist. So they advocate the construction of various social systems in order to regulate individual behavior. Individual anarchists, I suppose you could say they have faith in the individual to be self-regulating. Whether our society is ready for individualistic anarchism now, I don't. That's a big debate. But the individualistic anarchist would, see that as kind of like the ideal. The ideal is that everyone is educated, self-governing. They don't need anyone to tell them what to do. Kind of like in Plato's Perfect Republic. I don't know if you've read Plato's book Republic, but he proposes a cadre that he calls the philosopher kings. And the philosopher kings are individuals who are aspiring towards an understanding of reality and truth. And because of that, they don't need any sort of structure to tell them how to live life, right? They're self-governing. They discuss things with one another. They're involved in debate together. Their community is one of kind of mutual understanding in that regard. So they don't have anyone above them. And I think in my perfect individualistic anarchistic society, everyone would have an education. Everyone would be open to discussion and questioning with one another. No one would claim to have the ultimate truth, and we would be able to, get along with one another in that regard.
Yes, if we are all nihilists in a society and someone tells us, oh, guys, I found the truth. Come, God is here. We are going to make fun of them, and they're going to be the homeless people of the whole society.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that would, if you had a society of nihilists who claimed that, absolutes were illusions, that would certainly be the case. If someone came around and said, "Hey, I've got the truth," there'd be a great deal of suspicion on the part of nihilists. Yeah.
It's it's very interesting because you mentioned so many times the word anarchy through and I want to ask the connection if it's the same thing, anarchy and nihilism.
Well, I think anarchy is more a political philosophy. I've been thinking about how anarchy seems to me to be the political manifestation of nihilism. They are connected historically. The Russian anarchists were very closely connected to the Russian nihilists. The distinction historically in pre-revolution Russia had to do with the nihilists not having any sort of positive program for society. They saw themselves as sort of like a ground clearing force to get rid of all of the rotten decay in society. And the anarchists tended to have a more positive view of what would be built after the destruction of the present order, right? So anarchy has, for me anyway, more of a positive sort of procedure or a positive program for the building up of society. I don't think nihilism doesn't in itself say anything about how to order society, because nihilism doesn't claim that there's any perfect truth. So I would see, in my mind, anarchy is one of the consistent outgrowths politically of an overall nihilistic philosophy.
So I want to take 20 seconds, maybe 15 seconds to explain you one theory that I have developed with my teacher. And so basically say that anything we're not sure about anything, maybe nothing matters, maybe we don't know anything about the truth and all this stuff. So the only right thing to do, because we have limited time here, is to have fun here. So is this a nihilistic perfect view? not perfect, because nihilistic has nothing to do with perfect.
The first thought that comes to my mind with what you're proposing there is, are you saying that having fun is the true value? That is the only thing that really does matter? In other words, are you positing fun as
no, we're not doing that. But because you don't know anything about all the other stuff, you don't know what your actions are correct. When you do, let's say, philanthropy is the right thing to do, and all this stuff, you have no idea on all these things. So, or what's the meaning of life, or all these things, what's the truth, God, and all this stuff. The only logical thing to do is to choose the paths that they are fun and have fun. Because when you have fun, you're going to enjoy more, learn more in the process. Because this podcast is very fun for me, so I'm having fun. So I'm learning faster. I'm enjoying it, and so kind of this is the theory. So I'm curious to see if this fits into nihilism 100%.
Well, can I ask you another question about fun? What is fun? Do you equate it with pure pleasure? Do you equate it with long-term goals? How do you define fun in this case?
Fun is the thing that you do now, and you are in a flow state. You are enjoying this thing now. The time flies, let's say.
Good. So, I mean, with that type of experience, sometimes that's an experience that happens like that in the instant, but it's also the type of experience that sometimes you have to cultivate over the long run, like doing a podcast. You have to learn how to use the equipment, which might not in itself be fun, but might promote later fun. So,
yes.
So, having fun can be fun in the moment. That type of fun can oftentimes be very destructive to your life, right? There's plenty of people who think that they're having fun, but they're not really having fun, because in the long run, their short-term fun leads them to go to prison or to destroy their health, okay, or to harm other people who, then they're alienated from. Long-term fun sometimes requires that you engage in short-term suffering in order to reap longer-term, benefits. And so that's what comes to mind with your theory here, to me, is that if life is meaningless, and if the only thing that you should be doing is having fun, it raises the question: so what kind of fun? It can't mean just living in the moment. It has to mean something more than that. And it has to involve suffering.
So let's say by the way, very interesting points. I love your points. Let's say a combination of this fun. Let's say of the moment fun, that let's say, okay, let's do mushrooms now to explore the universe, and like, I'm not sure if it will be a long term the best thing for me to do now with my time, better than just me, I don't know, learning how to use a camera so I can have long term fun in a different way, and a combination of these things. So, but in nihilism, can you say? But in nihilism, I understand you don't have principles of too much. You don't think too much about, oh, this is the main thing that we need to follow. I don't know. Like, I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no. I mean, this is perfect. So, for instance, with learning how to use the camera or the microphones, okay, you wouldn't claim that everyone should be learning how to make podcasts, right? I mean, that's not what you're advocating. It's for you. Now, in order to learn to do those things, you need to suffer in the short term for some sort of long-term goal. That long-term goal is a projection of your desires. I want to create podcasts, and I want them to be good in my assessment. I want them to be as close to perfection as possible, but you never create the perfect podcast. So, from the nihilistic perspective, what you're talking about with fun, I think it plays a role here. Okay? So, for the nihilist, you're doing exactly what you should be doing, but you're never going to do it perfectly. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. You should do whatever it is that you've set your mind upon. You take those goals as your own. You own those goals. There's something, in existential philosophy, this view that you need to take responsibility for yourself. Okay? That the goals you choose in life are your goals. And if they're important to you, then embrace them and do as much as you can with them. That doesn't mean that in the grand scheme of things, it means anything. In 10,000 years, these recordings might be burned up in, some big disaster or conflagration, and no one will remember you or me. But in the time being, this is what gives us something to do. It doesn't mean it's the only thing to do. So, that's my response to your point about having fun, is that real fun, in this sense, does require the formulation of abstract goals that you're working towards. And that means that in the short run, there's going to be suffering, there's going to be, struggle, which is not fun in the grand sense, but it contributes to a greater project. And that project, whether it's making a podcast, whether it's writing a book, whether it's, drawing a picture, that's the point, is to formulate your own goals and to engage in your own projects. That's what I would see as the point of living human life.
So you said one point about the fun, that it's, even when you have fun, to not put fun on a pedestal, that this is the sort of, to understand that you cannot have peak fun, perfect fun,
right,
and all this stuff. And it will be okay. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, what would be perfect fun? Fun doesn't exist.
This podcast life doesn't get any better. Perfect fun is here.
Well, I may agree with you on that.
So you mentioned too many times the word suffering, and I'm curious to understand what's the role in this nihilistic view.
Mm-hmm. Well, suffering, in the sense that I'm talking about it, is that experience of falling short, the experience of missing your mark. The term passion is associated with suffering, like the passion of the Christ, is really the suffering of Christ as he's going to the cross. So passion and suffering are intimately connected with one another. So when you're suffering, you're missing your goal, you're aspiring towards something that is eluding you. You're not getting what it is that you really want in that moment. And that's part and parcel, I think, of all human life. That's where I agree with Buddhists. I agree with Buddhism in the first noble truth, that life is suffering. It's not, the Buddha had claimed that even love, when you're in love with someone, that's a form of suffering, because you're trying
but not perfect suffering.
What you did, not perfect suffering? Yeah, well, there is no.
Yes.
Yeah, there is no perfect suffering, but there's the experience of suffering. So even in love, you're not the person that you're in love with. You're trying to make a connection with that person, and so there's always that gap. There's always that separation or alienation between you and the object of your love. That's where suffering lies, in that gap the gap between what it is you want and what it is that you get. So like we were talking about with having to endure short-term pains in order to reap long-term fun. You always have that gap between you and what it is that you're trying to do, so long as you're in this world. Who knows? Maybe in heaven that gap disappears and everything is exactly the way it should be. For some of us, that might seem more like hell than heaven.
Yeah, yes. So I want to admit that I romanticize suffering. It's like suffering is so, I don't know, a lot of people try to eliminate human suffering, but like human suffering is perfect. Is not there is nothing. It's amazing experience, like because if you don't suffer, like I will give you an example. Like uh I went to a Navy SEAL training for 8 months. That was the ultimate suffering.
Uh-huh.
But it was so beautiful. So I have so many good memories. I understand myself a lot better. Suffering, it's a lot of times growth, a lot of times teaching, there is so many stuff. And it's like, sometimes it's more fun than the outcome itself that you're trying to do. Like, who cares about finishing Navy SEALs the day that you finish the ceremony?
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing is the reward. So yes, so but this can you hear me? Yeah, yes. So this nihilistic view, it allows you to see things, I think, in this way.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I mean, Nietzsche, he wrote Beyond Good and Evil that the English psychologists, he's talking about utilitarian philosophers, they want to eliminate human suffering. And Nietzsche, he boldly states, we want to make human suffering even more than it ever was, which sounds outrageous. It's like, why would someone want to make human suffering, expand human suffering? Well, his point is your point, is that there's something vital and important about suffering. Suffering is what do they say? Suffering builds character. Suffering is what pushes you towards a goal. Suffering is what allows you to learn things about the world. It's a passion. Suffering is a passion. Now, yeah, there's physical suffering, certainly. I was in the Army, and so I sympathize with your experience with the Navy SEAL training. The training I went through was Army boot camp, which is nothing like SEAL training, but still it was a type of physical suffering that like you, I look back on and I sort of cherish it. I'm glad I did that. It sucked in a way, but it was also the most wonderful thing imaginable in another way.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, even when their loved ones die, my mother died, their wife died, or their sister died, they recall this stuff. This is what you're saying, and it builds so much character. Like, they think, if this didn't happen, or if the loved one didn't break up with me, like even the worst case scenario, like stuff, even if I didn't get kidnapped, I'm saying about crazy stuff. Those are the things. A lot of times when I meet people and they are cool, they always have like a background story like that they are cool. So yes, so let's increase human suffering.
Yeah, well, it makes people more interesting, certainly. Physical suffering is one thing. As you're, pointing out, there's also non-physical or, mental suffering that we go through. And the interesting thing to me about those two types of suffering is that, physical suffering is the lesser of the two types. You can suffer through a lot of physical torment if it's for a goal. Nietzsche says, if you have a why, you can endure any how. Okay. If you have something that you are focused on mentally, then your physical suffering can be experienced not so much as suffering, but as something that is propelling you towards this non-physical goal. So mental suffering is the hard one. That's the real hard one.
You are touching on one very interesting topic, because I want to suffer, but a lot of times when I'm discussing this with my teacher, he's saying that a lot of people don't have the same mindset like you, and therefore their suffering sucks 1,000 times more.
Yeah. Yeah, you put two people in the same situation, and depending upon the state of their mind, yeah, one person might not suffer as much as another person, even though objectively they're going through the same sort of circumstance. In the army, that's what they used to tell us. Everything is mind over matter. If you don't mind, it don't matter, right? So yeah, the mental state that you're in is what I think is key in determining the degree of suffering that you're going through. So that's the crux of it in terms of suffering.
Yes. So a lot of times, let's say I go to I have an argument with a person, or like I go to a street and I said something bad to someone, and that's a lot of times I don't bother to feel too bad about the situation, because maybe they learned something about that. Maybe that was they went home, and that was literally changed their lives for a better direction or something. You don't never know. But if they so that's why I'm very happy, because a lot of times I feel like a weirdo alone thinking about this stuff. Oh, it's good to insult people. I'm not saying that you agree with me that we need to insult people, but even being able to discuss this stuff with someone, it feels like...
I mean, don't you think that some people are more ready to take criticism or to be insulted than other people? So like a child, you don't criticize a child about their goals in life and all of that the way you would criticize an adult. As Houston Smith said, there's nothing wrong with children playing with toys, but it's a real tragedy when a middle-aged man is still playing with toys, right? That different people are at different stages of, I'll call it spiritual development. Certain people are more ready to hear things than other people. So it doesn't make sense to talk, nihilistic philosophy with someone who, simply wants to make a lot of money. Okay. It doesn't make sense to talk about nihilistic philosophy with a 5-year-old. It takes a certain level of spiritual elevation in order to engage with those types of topics. And that takes preparation, and there's nothing, it's not that there's anything wrong with being a child or wanting to make money. It's just that there's a certain mindset that goes along with different states of being. So everyone's different in that regard. So, when you're saying that, you feel bad about insulting people, sometimes, but then think that maybe it's helping them. Well, if they're prepared to be helped, then, maybe the insult will be something they reflect upon, and that will, fortify them later on in life. And maybe that's a good thing. Yeah. But it has to be the appropriate type of, comment to the appropriate type of person.
Yes, but in a nihilistic view, I'm taking things to a extreme. Then it doesn't matter if you insult someone, right? Because anything doesn't matter anyways.
Yeah. Well, there's different levels of significance, I would say, as well. So, oftentimes when we're talking about things not mattering, we're talking in the cosmic sense. So, for me, it's oftentimes helpful to think in terms of cosmic meaninglessness. I had a professor once who, told those of us in the seminar that we shouldn't hesitate to speak up and to say stupid things in the seminar, because in the grand scheme of things, no one's going to remember what you said anyway, which in one sense could be kind of depressing, but in another sense, it's kind of liberating. It opens you up to talk and to, to be free with your thoughts. So, the cosmic meaninglessness, or you might call it cosmic nihilism, is that viewpoint that, when I abstract away from my own individual perspective to the cosmic perspective, everything is insignificant. Okay, nothing lasts, nothing matters. There's also, however, a type of significance that attaches to your perspective, your individual lived existential situation. The fact that to you making the podcast, that goal is important. Or to me, watching a certain horror movie, or listening to a certain band is significant and important to me. I can recognize that it's important to me, but in the cosmic sense is meaningless, right? So cosmic significance operates at a different level, I would say, than individual significance and meaning. So I'm comfortable talking about my own individual meaning and recognizing that to the universe, it's meaningless.
So you are saying we shouldn't insult others?
I don't think we should. Everyone has their own sorts of goals, their own projects, things that are important to them. And just because they're not important to me, that doesn't mean anything, because in the grand scheme of things, my goals don't mean anything to the universe. And that's that sense of liberation.
What if I insult people because of authenticity and just speaking my mind, if he's saying my truth? That still I should be mindful about that.
So if you're authentically upset with someone and you're authentically expressing something, I mean, personally, I don't see anything wrong with authentically expressing, what you're truly feeling. I suppose it's incumbent upon the other person in that case, if they're going to be authentic, to recognize that you're expressing something true about yourself, that, if they're going to be an authentic person, that they should recognize that as well. Cosmically, does it matter if you, blow up at someone or become frustrated with someone and yell at them? Cosmically, it doesn't matter, I suppose. But I mean, entering into, that partnership that we were talking about earlier, if we're going to find, points of contact between us, I think it's facilitated by trying to understand the other person and not alienating other people. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, it makes perfect sense. And thank you for answering these weird questions that they have, because they are not normal, as I never see people expressing them in my life before.
I think they're perfectly good philosophical questions.
So I have a question about death with all this stuff that we are discussing. So death is something that doesn't matter. We're all gonna die, and our life, like you said, in the grand scheme of theme, like what role death plays in this nihilistic view?
Well, one of the themes amongst philosophers that deal with nihilism is death. So there's a sense in which death, human death specifically, it's evidence of our finitude. The fact that we're not eternal, that we're not gods, that we're not going to be here, forever. So philosophers like Martin Heidegger claim that the awareness of our death, of our finitude, is part of what makes us the type of creatures that we are. So in your very being that you are not a god, that you're not going to exist eternally, that there's an expiration date on your existence. And that fact about you is what can, one, lead to despair. Okay? It can lead to the feeling that, well, nothing really matters at all. So it can lead to that type of nihilism, the nihilism of passivity and the nihilism of meaninglessness. It can also be the sort of motivation that pushes you to do things, recognizing that you won't be here forever might be the very thing which motivates you to do something with the time that you have while you are here, to engage in projects, to do things that you do value. They may not value in the grand scheme, in the cosmic sense, but they value to you here and now. That's Heidegger. He talks about human existence as, the term he uses in German is das Sein, which means being here now. Who are you? You are the type of being that is here now. You have an expiration date. You're going to die. You're not going to be here forever. What you do in that span from your now to your expiration date, that's your project. That's your human project. You can, even if you say, I'm not going to do anything, that's still a choice. You're still, when you say you're not going to do anything, you're still doing something, right? You have to decide what doing nothing means. Does it mean lying in my bed all day? Does it mean drinking all day? Or does it mean...
So is death is the best thing ever, like you're describing it?
And when put in this light, it certainly does have positive characteristics. We tend to think, like many philosophers think of nihilism as completely negative. Death itself seems to have certain positive characteristics that are beneficial for human beings. It can potentially get us to do interesting things. Yeah. What would it be like to watch a movie that never ended? It would be boring, right? Yes. Think of death as like the concluding scene in a film, the last page on a novel. If your life is this story, if it has this narrative arc, it has to have a conclusion. And death is what offers that conclusion.
Yes, and it would be boring if something didn't have a conclusion or an end.
Right. If it just went on and on and on. And interestingly enough, that's one of the paradoxes in nihilism, is that there are people who come to nihilistic conclusions from the fact that of human death and finitude. Well, if we don't live forever, then what's the point? But you can also come to a nihilistic conclusion from the thought of, existing forever. If you existed forever, what would be the point? There would be no point. So that's kind of paradoxical. You can arrive at a nihilistic conclusion either from immortality or from mortality. Nietzsche writes about this in Thus Spake Zarathustra. He makes that point.
I give you $1 trillion. How do you spend it?
That's way more money than any one human being could ever spend. So my first thought would be that a lot of it would be given away. Give it to...
Yes, this is like where I always ask the guests on this podcast, like, how do you have the right impact that you want to have with those $1 trillion?
Mm-hmm. So family, friends who are in need would probably take priority, probably give a lot of it to charities. I think I'd buy a new motorcycle. And maybe start a publishing company. To me, money's important insofar as it, clears a space where you're not beholden to other people. I think that's the importance of money to me. And so I would utilize enough of that $1 trillion to keep myself insulated from, the needs to work, the needs to do what other people want me to do in order to pursue what it is that I wanted to do. Yeah. I don't know if that's a good answer or not.
So basically free yourself.
Yeah. Given the type of, capitalist economy that we live in, I think that's what I would use it for, to free myself. And that's a good way of putting it.
How did you learn all this stuff that we discussed today, and generally all the stuff that you know? Is mostly books, is mostly conversations with other people, is it meditation? How do you learn faster generally?
I'm someone who always loved reading. So I was when I was young, kind of a loner. So I spent a lot of time alone, reading, watching movies and such. So yeah, a lot of reading. But being with other people is, very, very important as well. Having mentors who have had educational experiences or, other types of experiences that I haven't had, and being in their presence and talking with them, making mistakes in front of them and having them correct me. That's been very, very important. So I've had a handful of mentors who, I'll remember throughout, my entire life, who have helped sort of kind of give me a path, give me a guidance. And those aren't just philosophers, sociologists, writers who I've met, who have been very, very helpful in teaching me. So reading, having conversations, and being under the tutelage of someone who is superior to me in knowledge, and living life is, the third thing that has been important to me to learn the things that I've learned. You mentioned, military training. One of the, big experiences in my life was, going through boot camp and, being a member of the U.S. Army. There was something very, I don't know, down to earth about it that was an important learning experience to me. So, those are the sorts of things, experiencing the world, failing in the world, going down the wrong paths. And the military was one of the wrong paths for me. It didn't suit me ultimately, but I wouldn't give it back, right? Working in certain jobs and realizing that that wasn't my way, studying certain subjects. I guess that's another fourth thing that I would say has been really, really important to me, is failure. Fail, 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 fail. And it's only through failing that you realize that path is not your path, right? I'll invoke Heidegger again. He wrote an essay in which he likened the doing philosophy to wandering through the woods. When you wander through the woods and you go down a path and you come to a dead end, you don't say, I came to the dead end, that was a waste of time. No, you say, oh, that's where that path led. It wasn't a waste of time. I've discovered something. Now I turn around and I go a different way. And that's how I found, life to be. There are a lot of, quote unquote failures. They're ultimately not failures in the big picture, because they taught me something. They taught me something about who I am and how I exist in the world. So yeah, all of those things have been really, really important to me.
Being a loner, reading books, and learning by yourself with the internet and all these stuff. Second is having mentors and other people that have superior knowledge to guide you. And third is just by experiencing life, going through all these wrong paths and understanding yourself through failure.
Perfect. I would add one more thing. You've made me think of one more thing. Heroes. I used to debate this with my friends when I was a teenager. I had friends who said, there's no heroes. Heroes don't exist in the world. And I was always of the view that I needed heroes. My heroes were, weird heroes, I suppose. They're people like Yukio Mishima, the author, okay, or Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher. Those were the types of heroes that were important to me. And they were important to me not because I thought that they knew the truth. I didn't think that they were perfect, but they showed me that certain things were possible. that there were certain paths in life that were possible. So I would say for me, having these hero figures, and honestly, some of the hero figures that I've had over the course of my life that I've met, they fell. Meeting my heroes was like the worst thing in the world. So having heroes that you don't meet, so you can still have this kind of ideal image of them, that's important to me.
It's very interesting what you said. So having heroes that you don't meet. So if you had the choice, it can be you choose to meet them or not meet them.
Now, from my perspective now, if I have a hero that I want to keep as a guiding sort of guidepost, it's best for me not to meet them. The ones that I've met always disappoint. Why? Because really there are no heroes except in your mind.
It's very interesting what you're saying, because I had exactly the same experience. So I had I had I don't know if you know, Mr. Beast is the biggest YouTuber in the world, and he has 180 million subscribers, and he was, when I was younger, my hero. But after I met him and I hung out with him and I became friends with him, he's stupid like me.
Right.
And another one that I had recently, I met Elon Musk, and he was another hero of mine, and it was like, he's still a hero of mine because he's amazing and stuff, but from 110 out of 100 that I loved him, now it's like maybe 9. It's like the love, because you see the flaws, you see that it's real, and that's similar to what they say sometimes. The most romantic, vivid, strong love is the love that you have and the other person don't know it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That reflects what we've been talking about all along here. There is maybe something useful in dethroning your heroes, because you realize that, oh, I could do that. Right? So there may be something useful in meeting heroes and realizing that they don't live up to your expectations, because then it's kind of like lowering the expectation. It's like now it opens it up for me to do that as well. But yeah, the downside of that, again, is that it lowers the expectation. Maybe you don't aspire as high as you otherwise would have. No, I agree with you.
Yes. So if I choose to meet them or not meet them, I choose to meet them because that gives me so much confidence in my ability to do stuff.
Well, and instrumentally, if that works for you, then that may be the right thing to do. I found that I tend to aspire more, like to a higher degree, if I'm trying to reach higher. And so if I don't meet my heroes and I'm still putting them up on a pedestal, I feel like I'm making myself bigger.
That's wow. You are a philosopher, bro. So we're talking something we didn't talk, and I left the best thing for now: humor. What did you learn about this interesting word?
What is humor? How does it relate to what we're talking about?
Anything about it. If you want to tell me jokes, feel free. I'm joking.
Yeah, well, humor I see as an attitude. It's a power that a person has. I make a distinction between humor and jokes, okay? And comedy. Okay? So, a comedy is kind of like an art form. It's a form that you find in drama, that you find in literature. So there's a kind of a narrative structure to comedy. Jokes are kind of like, little engineered, stories that evoke laughter. But humor is the attitude that can create things like comedy and that can create things like jokes. So that's the way I think of humor, as it's a human capacity. Not everyone has a sense of humor. Not everyone has the capacity to look at the world and to, organize a story in a funny way, or to create, a joke in a funny way. And so, so it's a capacity that not everyone has, but I think it's a really, really important and powerful capacity, in particular when looking at the world. Because for many people, like nihilists, there are nihilists who look at the world and find it to be a tragedy, an awful place. But with a sense of humor, I think you can look at a world that's filled with suffering, failure, struggle, and you can think of it from a humorous perspective and see the world as something that evokes laughter, something that is, a big cosmic joke. So, for me, humor is, it's a way of thinking, and it's a precious way of thinking. It's a powerful way of thinking that not everyone is capable of utilizing. What it does, I think, is it elevates the person above the phenomenon that they're looking at. So when you take a humorous perspective on, say, like death, what you're doing is you're elevating yourself above it, and you're demanding a certain type of, I guess you could say, pleasure from something that might otherwise cause pain. And I think the root of that ability, of that humorous ability, rests in a capacity to take incongruous phenomena and to linger with them. This is part of a whole philosophical theory of humor called the incongruity theory of humor. According to that theory, what we find humorous are things that are incongruous, that shouldn't fit together with one another. Okay? And so the person with a humorous attitude is the person who's able to look at things that shouldn't go together and find them funny, to find pleasure in them. So I'm trying to think of a good joke.
It's a skill, you think? It's something that you've been born with mostly?
I don't know. There may be people who are naturally capable of humor, who are born with that skill. I don't necessarily think that that's the only root of it. I think that you can probably learn to view the world humorously. And I think that the ability to learn to view the world humorously requires that you cease to see the world as a threat, because in a humorous state of mind, you're setting yourself apart from, suffering, the dangers of the world. You're looking at the world as though it's not threatening to you, that you're above it all. And so, I suspect that you can learn how to adopt that attitude. I don't know specifically how you go about learning it, but maybe you're born with it. Maybe you can also learn it as well. But yeah, it's a skill, as you said. It's a skill that I believe can be developed.
So how did you study humor? Like, how do you go and study humor?
When I first started, studying humor philosophically, I was in contact with this guy who's at the time the preeminent, humorous philosopher in the United States, John Morrell, and he said to me that it was a very lonely area of study. The philosophers didn't really study humor at that time, and so when I first started, philosophically studying humor, it was a lonely field. And so the way to study it was, to look back at classic texts. Most of the major philosophers in the West have made scattered comments about humor and about jokes, and to try to think through the implications of what people like Schopenhauer or Nietzsche wrote about humor, or Plato, Aristotle. But then to read, people like John Morell and contemporary humor theorists. And then I guess the biggest thing was just think, try to take that information that, read about, discussed with mentors, and then try to think through, what the implications of those theories were. So that's how I did. I did it in a formal setting. I did that in graduate school. So when I was studying for my doctorate in philosophy, I focused on, wrote a dissertation on nihilism and humor.
So as I understand, you are describing this humor thing as a very, very, very extremely useful tool to live life.
I think it is. It's the humorous attitude traditionally has been seen as kind of superficial. It's just like comedy is seen as superficial, whereas tragedy is seen as deep. To look at things in this deep, sort of sad way is somehow more profound. But I don't think that that's the case. I think that the humorous attitude has its own sort of depth and profundity to it. I've heard again and again and again actors saying that it is far more difficult to do comedy than it is to do tragedy. That there's something very, very, that requires a great deal of skill in order to be a successful humorist. So I think that, humor is, it is a skill. It's a rare skill. It's a difficult skill. And I think it's really, really profound, and it's really, really useful. And it's useful, in facing the dangers of the world. The world, as we've been talking about, for all this time, is a place that is filled with pain. It's filled with danger. It's filled with suffering. It's filled with all sorts of terrible things, death and sadness and all of that. One way to look at the world then is a tragedy. It's an awful, tragic sort of place. And a lot of people think the world is like that. But is there a way through, the skill of humor that you can turn your perspective around and master the world and see that same world, the world that's filled with death and suffering and failure, as a humorous place? And I think that, there are people who are capable of doing that. And in doing that, they master the world. They elevate themselves above the world, and they embrace the world for what it is. This is what Nietzsche calls joyful wisdom.
I'm sorry that I will say a small experience that I had. I had 30 days with no food. It was just I did it for fun as a challenge, and it was very bad. Like I was so angry. All these, I can't describe you how horrible the feeling was. Like suffering, a lot of suffering, basically. But beautiful, like I described, I enjoy suffering because there is a lot to it. But the only thing that I found hope at that time, it was laughing and humor to help me do what you're saying, like elevate life, like see that I'm above this, or like just past time. So I really, really, really enjoyed jokes and all this laughter and like humor in this situation.
Right. And in a case like that, what's interesting is that, sure, you're elevating yourself above, the objective situation of starving, but there's also an elevation of yourself over yourself. It's like you're looking at yourself going through the experience, and there's a part of your mind which is separating from you in order to look back at yourself. You're reflecting upon yourself, and that's where the humorous attitude resides. Right? It's in that
immediately when you do that process, that you see yourself, seeing yourself, it's there is kind of, you understand that it's not too bad.
Right, right. And this is a direct connection to what we were talking about before with cosmic nihilism or cosmic meaninglessness. That ability to separate from your ego, from your egoistic connection to yourself, and to see yourself in a grander perspective. It's like, I'm not that important. This is not that bad. And that's both how to embrace nihilism, but it's also the root of humor. And that's, to me, that's the connection there, is that the humorous attitude is a state of mind where one separates and is able to see the world from a sort of meta perspective that is nihilistic, but also humorous. It's like laughing at your own starvation, laughing at your own situation by separating yourself from yourself and reflecting back. Yeah.
Do we have free will?
I guess that depends on, that's a huge subject. Do we have free will? Are you wondering if if I think that, if I have an instinct on it, or
I don't know. Maybe if you personally, if the nihilist believes something or something like that. What's your thoughts on the topic?
I mean, personally, I do think that each of us has free will. There's a kind of existential aspect to my thought here. I believe that we're constantly freely choosing things. There are certain things that we don't choose, like the world that we're thrown into, the body that we possess, the fact that if you don't feed your body, you will starve. You don't choose, those facts about the world. But I do think that there is a type of free will that's involved in choosing the significance and the meaning of those facts. That Jean-Paul Sartre says that the world in itself, doesn't have disasters. A disaster doesn't exist in nature. All that exists in nature is the reorganization of matter. Disasters are an evaluation of human beings. So I think that we have a lot more free control over how it is that we interpret reality than we sometimes think that we have. So in that regard, I guess I would say that, yeah, I believe we have free will. So if I was born without a leg, I could choose freely to interpret that as a disability. I could also choose to interpret that as an opportunity to get an artificial limb and become a marathon runner. If I was, born into a poor family, I could see that as something that's going to force me onto the path of criminality, or I could choose to see that as the motivation for me to do great art, right? So that's where I think free will lies in the world. It lies for human beings in that spot in which we are choosing the significance of the facts around us. Okay? What does it mean to me?
Interesting. So it's not that we 100% choose the actions. That's not the important thing in what you are describing. We are choosing how we perceive the data that we have in front of us.
Yeah, I think that's well put. Right. So yeah, I don't choose the laws of physics, but I choose what I do with the laws of physics. I choose, how I harness the laws of physics, and in accordance with that which I value. So yeah, the world is a certain way, and there are certain things that I can't control in the world, but I can control my thoughts and my goals and my values about the world.
Dear friend, why you accepted to come on this podcast?
Why did I accept to come on the podcast? Well, after you sent me the invitation, I looked at some of your videos, in particular, you going to the Shaolin Temple and training with those monks. and the interview you had with another philosopher, and you seemed very sincere. You seemed very honest, and very down to earth. And so I thought that you would be an interesting person to talk to.
I'm sorry that I didn't live up to the
Nihilists expect that.
I want to say that our conversation today, it was really a really beautiful experience, because a lot of times, like, you believe something and it's like you don't know why you do believe it, and you don't know, nobody ever described it. I'm not saying that I'm fully a nihilist or something like that, but it was very beautiful, even just to understand. Because when I came here, I was like, nihilist is like they feel nothing as the thing. So now I'm so happy. I'm living this conversation, and I would love to talk to you again in the future.
No, it's a pleasure. I really enjoyed talking with you. It has been a lot of fun, and it's nice to have someone who's interested and who sort of provokes you to articulate your thoughts. And I feel like you did that really, really well. Thank you.
Yes, in a more simple way, because you have sometimes very clever people have the curse of knowledge. so when, because I told you I like to be honest, when I watch a lot of your podcast, I was like, oh my god, this guy is saying very cool things, but a lot of times in a very with the terms and stuff, the right terms and all this stuff, and that kind of gives away from the true understanding of what he's saying, of sinking in 100% your brain. So I was coming in the podcast with only one hope. I just want to make him speak simple.
Well, I think you did as good a job as you could, and I did as good a job as I could.
Okay, guys, thank you for watching. We love you. Bye-bye.